11 castles in Ireland are still somebody's home, and every single one of them is older than the United States itself. Most Irish castles are ruins by now, photographed once from a car park and then left behind. These 11 never got that treatment, because a family, a hotel guest, or a weekend renter has kept each one occupied for centuries. 3 of them even make a real claim to being the oldest or the longest inhabited castle in the entire country. And the very last one on this list ties a quiet Irish feel directly to the fall of Anne Boleyn. This list moves through 3 different ways a castle stays occupied. Some never stopped being a private family home, generation after generation, or came back to life after a break. One became a hotel, so a paying guest with no family connection at all can sleep inside it tonight. The rest are restored medieval tower houses you can rent whole for a week, floor by floor, as your own private castle in the middle of nowhere. Fix one number in your head before we start, because it's the spine of this whole video. The United States didn't exist as a country until 1776, and every single castle on this list was already standing, in most cases already old, long before that date. A few of these places also carry the title oldest inhabited castle in Ireland, or something close to it. That's worth knowing up front, because it's a claim repeated in heritage records, not a settled ranking handed down by historians, and more than one castle on this list makes it. We'll flag it every time it comes up. Number 1 on this list is Kilbrittain Castle in County Cork, and it makes the boldest claim of all 11. According to the Buildings of Ireland National Inventory, Kilbrittain lays claim to being the oldest inhabited castle in the entire country, with origins dating back as early as 1035. That's a claim stated as a claim by the record itself, and it deserves to be treated that way rather than repeated as settled fact by us. The castle sits dramatically on a rise above the surrounding village, with views running out in almost every direction. It's the kind of elevated position early lords chose on purpose, to be seen as much as to see. It began as a stronghold of the O'Mahony family before passing to the McCarthy Ray, a branch of one of Munster's major Gaelic dynasties. That matters because most of the castles on this list started life as Norman fortresses, built by families who arrived from across the Irish Sea. Kilbrittain started as something older and more local, a native Gaelic seat of power, standing before the Normans ever set foot in Ireland at all. Its story isn't an unbroken one, and the break is a violent one. Kilbrittain was burned during the Irish War of Independence in 1920, one of many landlord residences targeted during that period as symbols of the old order, and it was left a ruin for decades afterward. It was finally restored in the 1960s, and since 1988 it's been the home of the Cahill O'Brien family, who also take in guests. They aren't descendants of the O'Mahonys or the McCarthy Rees. They're a family who took on the work of keeping a claimed 1,000-year-old building standing and lived in. So the honest version of this story is a revived continuity, not an unbroken one. A castle that claims roots in 1035 went dark for roughly 40 years after a fire, then came back to life as somebody's actual home in the 1980s. Run the clock forward from that claimed founding date, and the United States wouldn't exist for another 741 years. Number 2 is Leixlip Castle in County Kildare, and it's the cleanest version of never stopped being a home on this entire list. It stands on a rocky outcrop above the point where the River Rye meets the River Liffey. That's a defensive position chosen for the same reason so many old strongholds sit at river junctions, control of the water and the roads that follow it. It was built in 1172 for Adam de Hereford, a Norman soldier who fought in Strongbow's army during the invasion of Ireland just 3 years earlier. The events attached to Leixlip are specific and dated, not vague legend. King John used it as a hunting base around the year 1200, riding out from its gates into the surrounding countryside. In 1316, it survived a 4-day siege by the army of Edward Bruce, brother of Robert the Bruce, during the wider Bruce invasion of Ireland. A castle strong enough to hold for 4 days against a determined army had real military value. Records note it was modified and extended more than once to keep up with exactly that kind of pressure. What makes Leixlip stand apart is everything that happened after the fighting stopped. Heritage sources describe it as continuously inhabited for roughly 800 years, through tenants that included the first French ambassador to the newly formed Irish Free State in the 1920s. It was sold in 1945 and finally bought by Desmond Guinness of the brewing family in April of 1958. Guinness was also the founder of the Irish Georgian Society, a man who spent much of his life campaigning to save historic Irish buildings from demolition. That makes his purchase of an 800-year-old fortress feel less like an accident and more like a philosophy in action. It remains a Guinness family home today, and it's rarely open to the public, not a museum with a gift shop and an audio guide. It's a private house that happens to be over 800 years old, where the front door has, as far as any surviving record shows, never once stopped opening for whoever was living behind it. Number 3 takes us out of the Republic of Ireland entirely. Killyleagh Castle sits in County Down in Northern Ireland, which makes this an island-wide list rather than a Republic-only one. That's worth saying plainly rather than letting the map blur together. It dominates the small town built up around it, and it's believed to be one of the oldest inhabited castles in the entire country. Parts of the structure date back to around 1180. What sets Killyleagh apart visually is a 19th century redesign that reshaped it in the style of a Loire Valley chateau, complete with turrets and a fairy tale silhouette rising over an otherwise ordinary small town street. Underneath that romantic remodel sits a genuine 12th century core. What you're actually looking at is a real medieval castle wearing a French costume, added roughly 600 years after the walls first went up. That kind of layering, a working military stronghold slowly reshaped into a comfortable decorative family seat, is exactly how most of these buildings survived at all. The Rowan Hamilton family lives there today, and their connection to the building runs back centuries, which is a different kind of continuity than Kilbrittain's revived one. This is a family who can trace their own history alongside the stones themselves, rather than a family who arrived afterward to take on the work of maintaining somebody else's legacy. In 1180, nobody anywhere had spoken the word America, and this particular castle would already be standing for another 596 years before that country existed at all. Number 4 is Springfield Castle in County Limerick, and it introduces a name that still carries real weight today. The Norman Fitzgeralds settled this site in 1280, more than a century after the first wave of the invasion, and their descendants built the stone keep that still forms the core of the courtyard complex standing here now. That keep dates to the 1400s, and it survives inside a much larger cluster of later buildings, arranged around a courtyard. It's a pattern you'll see again and again on this list, a medieval heart wrapped in centuries of later additions, extensions, and repairs. The Fitzgerald line that built it connects to the same wider Norman network of families that shaped much of southern and western Ireland in the centuries after the invasion. That network spread out from a handful of original grants into dozens of separate branches and castles. Springfield is still lived in today by the Dean family, and the current owner holds an actual hereditary title, Robert Dean, the 9th Baron Muskerry. That's not a historical footnote pulled from an old record. It's a living title attached to a living resident of a 15th century keep, someone who inherited both the name and the upkeep. Parts of the estate are let out for stays and weddings now, the same hybrid of private home and paying guests that keeps showing up across this list. Keeping a medieval keep standing isn't cheap, no matter how old your family name is. Number 5 is Barmeath Castle in County Louth, and it's worth pausing on for what it teaches about how these buildings actually age over time. The core is a genuine 15th century tower house, built by the Moore family as a defensible home rather than a decorative one. What you would see driving past it today, though, is mostly not that original building at all. Barmeath was remodelled and castellated in the neo-Norman style during the 18th and 19th centuries. The romantic turrets and battlements that make it look like a storybook castle were added roughly 300 to 400 years after the original tower went up. The medieval stronghold underneath is real, and it's still there. Most of what your eye actually reads as castle from the outside is later theatre, built by people who wanted their home to look older and grander than it already was. That's its own small irony worth sitting with. Barmeath is owned and lived in today by the Bellew family, whose current head holds the title Lord Bellew. So a genuine 15th century tower house, dressed up 2 or 3 centuries later to look even more like a castle than it started out being, is still right now a family's actual home. That combination, real medieval bones hidden under a later romantic shell, is about to come up again, on a much bigger scale. Number 6 is Birr Castle in County Offaly, and it closes out the family home half of this list on its biggest and most famous name. Birr's roots reach back to a Norman fortress from around 1170, first held by the O'Carrolls, a Gaelic dynasty who controlled the surrounding territory. The property passed to the Parsons family in 1620. Here's the honest part, because it matters more here than almost anywhere else on this list. The castle you would actually see on camera today is largely 17th to 19th century work, built up over generations by the Parsons family. The origins are medieval. Most of the physical fabric standing on the site right now isn't. This entry belongs on the list for the family's unbroken seat stretching back to 1620, not for any claim about surviving medieval stonework. What that seat produced sets it apart from the rest of this list, and it's also the reason Birr works a little differently from everywhere else here. Birr remains the home of the Earl of Ross to this day, and its grounds are famous for elaborate gardens. They're also famous for the Leviathan, a giant telescope built there in the 19th century that was for decades the largest in the world. The estate now also functions as a major public visitor attraction, with a science centre built up around the Leviathan itself. Unlike most entries on this list, Birr is both a family's private home and a place tourists are actively invited to walk through. A family that has held the same seat since 1620 once built the largest telescope on the planet in their own back garden. And that same family is still there, still living beside it. 6 castles down, and every single one has been somebody's unbroken or revived private home. No ticket desk required for most of them. No roped-off rooms behind velvet rope. Just families who never left or who came back after the building went dark for a while. The next 5 flip that entire arrangement on its head. These are castles where any stranger who books a room can be the one sleeping inside medieval walls tonight. No inheritance required, just a reservation. We start with the one where a family finally let go after 700 years of holding on. Number 7 is Kilkea Castle in County Kildare, a few kilometres northwest of the town of Castle de Motte. The site was first fortified back in 1180 with a simple motte and bailey, an earthwork rather than a stone building. The stone castle standing today took shape in 1426 when John Fitzgerald, the 6th Earl of Kildare, rebuilt and heavily strengthened it into the fortress whose fabric largely survives right now. The Fitzgerald family held Kilkea for roughly 700 years, and it stands alongside Kilbrittain and Leixlip as another claimant to being the longest continuously inhabited castle in Ireland. As with those two, treat that as a competing claim rather than a settled title, because all three heritage records make a version of the same boast. Kilkea also carries a piece of folklore worth flagging honestly rather than dressing up as fact. It's tied to Gerald Fitzgerald, the 11th Earl of Kildare, remembered in local tradition as the Wizard Earl, and the castle is reputedly haunted by him to this day. He was a real historical figure. The alchemy and sorcery attached to his name is folklore layered onto that real person over centuries, not documented history, and worth enjoying as exactly that. The turn in this story came in 1960, when the Fitzgeralds finally sold the castle and its estate after 7 centuries of ownership. It reopened as a hotel in 1966 under the direction of architect Niall Montgomery, and today it operates as a luxury hotel and golf estate. 700 years of one family ending is a loss by any measure. It also means that for the first time on this list, the person sleeping inside a medieval castle tonight doesn't need a family name, a title, or an inheritance at all. They just need a reservation. Number 8 is Ballyportry Castle in County Clare, and it takes us from booking a hotel room to having sole use of an entire medieval building for yourself. It was built in the late 1400s by the native Gaelic O'Brien and O'Loughlin clans on a rocky outcrop inside the limestone landscape of the Burren. The views sweep across bare limestone pavement, grazing cattle and the Atlantic coast in the distance. That makes it a Gaelic tower house rather than a Norman one, echoing Kilbrittain's origins at the very start of this list. A conservation project running from 1960 to 1983 stabilised the limestone walls and preserved something you can still see today: original hazel branch plaster imprints left behind by the medieval builders. Wattle branches were pressed into wet plaster centuries ago as part of the original construction technique. The impressions of those branches are still visible in the walls right now, a literal fingerprint left by the people who built the place with their own hands. The castle sits inside a 17th century bourne wall with round corner towers on a 5-acre property. Today it's let out whole as self-catering accommodation on a minimum stay of 3 nights, sleeping up to 8 guests across 6 bedrooms and 6 floors. Modern comforts have been worked in carefully, with underfloor heating, 2 log-burning stoves and 2 full kitchens, so guests can cook for themselves or arrange a welcome dinner on arrival. No family lives there anymore in the way the Bellews or the Deans still do. Instead, for 1 week at a time, you do. Number 9 is Ballyhannon Castle, also in County Clare, roughly 90 minutes from Ballyportry, and it tells a rougher version of the same kind of story. It was built around 1490 by Hugh McNamara and possibly his brother Ceoda, sons of Donchad McNamara, and it was also known historically as Castle Fergus, after its position near the River Fergus. This one didn't pass quietly between owners, the way some others on this list did. In 1560, Queen Elizabeth I granted it to Conor O'Brien, the Earl of Thomond, moving it out of McNamara hands entirely by royal order. Later, a McNamara owner forfeited the property after a rebellion, and it passed first to a Protestant settler and then back into O'Brien hands again. A sketch made in 1675, preserved in what is known as the Edenvale Survey, shows the castle still roofed and defended by its bourne wall. It's a rare midlife snapshot of the building, taken centuries before anyone thought seriously about restoring it. That restoration finally came in the early 1970s, led by an American oil heiress, Elizabeth Phillips, and her husband, Henry D. Irwin, who spent years bringing the ruin back to life. Today, the castle operates as guest accommodation, marketed as a chance to experience what life was like in a Gaelic stronghold during medieval times. This one survived conquest, forfeiture, and reassignment by royal decree, on top of the ordinary passage of time. It's still standing largely because of the people who chose to fight for it centuries later. Even that gap is short next to the one castle on this list that sat completely empty for longer than most countries have existed at all. Number 10 spent more time sitting empty as a ruin than any other castle on this list. Turin Castle in County Mayo stands on a site held by the Norman de Burgo family, later known as the Burkes, in the barony of Kilmaine. The exact century of the standing tower is genuinely debated among the sources. Treat it as roughly 15th to 16th century, built on an earlier de Burgo site, rather than the flat 13th century date some tourism write-ups round down to for a punchier headline. The de Burgo lords who held this land became so absorbed into Gaelic culture over the generations that historical sources describe them using a Latin phrase, Hiberniores Hibernis ipsis, meaning more Irish than the Irish themselves. That's a real description, not a throwaway line, of a Norman family that stopped being culturally Norman in any meaningful sense within a handful of generations of first settling here. They adopted the language, law, and customs of the people around them. The name Turin itself is thought to come from an old Irish phrase meaning something like small bleaching field, a detail about the land itself long before anyone built on it. Then Turin went dark for a very long time. It sat abandoned as a roofless ruin for roughly 250 years before restoration finally began in 1997, using traditional building methods and materials to bring it back to something livable. New owners Marnie and Brendan carried out a full refurbishment starting in 2008 with the help of local tradespeople. Today the castle sleeps up to 12 guests across 5 floors, including a great hall under a barrel-vaulted stone ceiling. 250 years of complete silence followed by a full return to life is the sharpest turnaround on this entire list. Every castle so far on this list has been about a family, a title, or a booking. The 11th and last one is about none of those things. It's about who was hiding inside and why. Clonony Castle in County Offaly, near Shannon Harbour, was built by the MacCoglan clan around the year 1500, which makes it the youngest castle on this entire list by construction date. It is placed last on purpose. Its story lands the hardest of all 11, even though it is the youngest castle on the list. The castle was ceded to Henry VIII by John Og MacCoglan. It then passed to Thomas Boleyn, father of Anne Boleyn, around the time Henry wanted to marry her and needed the right connections in place. Anne Boleyn was executed in 1536, and the Boleyn family's standing at court collapsed almost overnight. Her cousins, Mary and Elizabeth Boleyn, are said to have lived out the rest of their lives at Clonony, tucked away in rural County Offaly. That is about as far from the royal court that killed their relative as 2 women in their position could reasonably get. A gravestone discovered in 1803, roughly 100 yards from the castle, is inscribed for Elizabeth and Mary Boleyn. It traces their descent directly back to the Boleyn family in England, right down to naming the earlier generations of the line. That gravestone reportedly still stands on the grounds today, though the inscription has worn down enough over 2 centuries that it needs a rubbing to read in full. The castle's restored ground floor, including a barrel-vaulted ceiling, has at times been open for visitors to see both the stonework and the stone itself. Here is the one honest gap on this entire list, and it deserves to be said plainly rather than smoothed over. Clonony was listed for sale in the early 2020s at roughly €695,000, and no available record confirms who owns it or lives there right now. So unlike the other 10 castles on this list, this one does not end with a confirmed resident locking the door tonight. It ends with a weathered gravestone still standing in a quiet Irish field, marking 2 women who outlived a queen, Behind that castle sits a front door that nobody watching this can currently confirm is locked by anyone at all. Built around 1500, Clonony is still 276 years older than the United States. Even the youngest, least certain castle on this entire list clears that bar with centuries to spare. 11 castles, 3 different ways of still being lived in, and one gravestone nobody has fully explained. If you have ever stood in front of any of these, tell me in the comments what it actually felt like. Because photographs never quite get it right.